The delayed bombclad by Beth at the age of 8. Real question, if Anna at age of 9 could have beaten Beth at age of 9? I think so. It's at the age of 9 when I beat my first Grandmaster opponent. She's trolling me! She's bullying me! Beth, how dare! Now you resign. Haha. At age 15, Beth is rated 1800. She has been studying chess despite being unable to play for years. Eager to prove herself, she enters the state championship. How will you fare as her opponent? Hopefully well, but now she's getting much stronger. Let's go. Knight to f3. I'm gonna push d5 and see if we transpose to the Queen's Gambit. No, she doesn't want the Queen's Gambit. This could still be either with c4, it usually will lead to the English opening, but could still transpose. If she ends up pushing d4 later, could still transpose to the Queen's Gambit. d4, come on, Beth, you can do this. No, she wants to play the English, not the Queen's Gambit. That's fine, that's fine. Mr. Scheibel to Beth, where's my $10? I know, she still owes it to Mr. Scheibel. She ends up pushing d4, but it's not the Queen's Gambit, the traditional setup anymore after b3, bishop b2. It's okay, we can't always have the Queen's Gambit on the board. So the Queen's Gambit is a very popular opening. That's d4 and c4. And I would have pushed d5 and e6, which is the Queen's Gambit declined, when you don't take that pawn on c4. But those are the initial moves usually at the Queen's Gambit. This position isn't exactly that. I'm gonna develop my bishop to the long diagonal. This is a much more solid game. She's playing strong moves. I'm aiming to place the knight on e4 and then back it up with the other. After this trade, it makes sense to take back with the e-pawn. Knight to c3. This is a very normal position. She's much stronger. I can feel already that she's much stronger than the previous bots I have played against. Let's go for the plan I mentioned. Knight to e4. If there's a trade, that's a fork. She plays the same. She plays really well. Knight to e5. This is getting challenging. I hope I will not get stuck at Beth at the age of 15, but so far I don't have a single advantage. There's no advantage, no tricks, nothing she has fallen for. It's just a very normal position. I can play f6 to chase that knight away, but it comes with the price of weakening my king slightly on that diagonal, or I can place my knight here to support the other one, but that will mean that her knight on e5 stays there for a long time. Instead of all that, I think I'm just gonna go for bishop d6 to put pressure on the knight with the bishop and see if she pushes f3 or f4. She had the choice between those moves. She wants to chase my knight away, which is very logical. And after the trade, I cannot win the pawn because this bishop is backing it up. She played a good move. I'm gonna take on c3. And so now if I were to take on e5, I'm not winning a pawn because this bishop is guarding it. I could instead push f6 to do the same that she has done to chase the knight away. I think in that case we're gonna see a trade on d7 and both of us just playing with bishops and heavy pieces. It's roughly equal, that position, or slightly better for white. I probably would take white in that position. But yes, she's playing much stronger. She's playing much stronger. Shall I go for that? This knight is annoying. Of course, I cannot leave it here. So either a trade in the future or chasing it away is what I should aim for. Let's chase it away and then try to exploit the weakness of the e3 pawn. This is a backward pawn. I'm not sure about her move f4. I probably wouldn't have gone for it. I thought that she was trying to push it to e4 and create a strong center. If she can do it, I thought that pawn structure is good for white. After f4, this pawn is backward forever, so I'm gonna try to take advantage of that by placing the rook on e8 to start attacking it. But I need to be careful about moves like queen h5 that will attack my king. The rook can come to the king side too, rook f3, rook h3. So she does have a really active position, and just because this e3 pawn is weak, it's me who will have to protect the king. It's me who will have to be making some good defensive moves. Luckily, I always have f5 to shut down this diagonal, so I think I'm not in trouble, but I'll need to be careful. This sacrifice too is something to take into consideration, but after that, queen check, back here to g8. I think it's too slow for now at this sacrifice. So I'm playing rook e8 and f5. When I get attacked, I'm gonna shut down that diagonal. She plays queen f3. I was expecting more the rook lift, but in both cases I think I'm just gonna shut everything down by pushing f5 before she could. So yeah, let's fix that pawn structure and shut down the diagonal of the bishop. Now we can start creating more pressure against the e3 pawn by doubling rooks. That usually is the way to go. Rook e6 I can also play and bring my rook over through the 6th rank, but I don't really have much attack. Just the rook on its own will not do any miracles. So I think I'm simply aiming for rook e7 and rook e8. It's still a very balanced position in a way that this is just one weakness, and white has plenty of ways to guard that pawn. She plays rook c1, shifting over to this semi-open c file. I don't think she has any particular threats, but what she probably wants is after rook e8 to guard the pawn with the bishop and then use the c5 for her rook. I can then try to push c5, so I'm gonna go for this. Rook e8 and the bishop d2, c5. Also without the bishop moving, still I'm considering this. Of course it's not the same, but if we trade, I'm gonna end up winning some material. No, not really, because my bishop is hanging too. This is a complex position. Beth at the age of 15 is not an easy opponent already. Do we want to play c5? I think even if I don't manage to push d4 instantly, taking back on c5 and then opening up the long diagonal is something that should benefit me, so I'm gonna go for it. I'm also threatening, if she had not taken, I was gonna say that I'm also threatening to push c4, because after these trades both the queen and the bishop were gonna be hanging. D takes, I'll take back with the pawn, and I'm threatening d4. The other idea was to push without taking back. I could push and attack the queen and the bishop, but my bishop too is hanging, so I don't think I was gonna win material. She now has moved out of the diagonal. She doesn't let me push d4. This is tense. She has prevented my threat and now is threatening my pawn on f5. What a tense game. And if I play g6, I'm weakening all this diagonal. Suddenly it is white who will be attacking, so I might have to play a bit of a passive move and recognize that maybe c5 was a bit too early to push. I'm gonna defend that pawn with the rook. g4, she's going for it. She's an aggressive attacking player, but it makes sense what she's doing, because if I take the pawn, she's gonna capture my h7 pawn and my king will be in trouble, so I cannot take the pawn. I cannot take it, but it comes with a price. This g4 pawn push comes with a price. It also weakens her king, and I'm hoping that that will be something I can use. I'm looking at d4s in the right moment to then place my queen on the long diagonal, or protect this, but I could only do it with the pawn. I don't want to play g6. That does not look good. Wow, this is a tricky situation. Losing the pawn is not too bad if I have attack in the meantime, so I'm looking at d4 or queen c6 and then opening up the long diagonal. How can we do this? Bishop c8 doesn't really protect the pawn, because after that capture I would have to take first with the rook, and that will be taken by the bishop, so I can't really guard the pawn as of now. I could play bishop c8 to then move the queen away, but I don't want to go that passive. I'm looking more at options with queen c6 and d4 to attack her king. The more I look at it, the better it becomes, and that's how the psychology behind the attack is. It's much more difficult to be on the defensive and see that your king is under fire. So psychologically, sure, this g4 is unpleasant. I don't know how objectively good or bad it is, but psychologically it's really annoying, very annoying. So I was thinking of queen c6, if she takes my pawn, d4, to open up the diagonal. E takes d4. Then I have a check on h1, but after king f2, there's no follow-up check, and my queen is hanging. It may not be good, that long diagonal attack, as tempting as it is. What if I go and accept the pawn is another question. Because sometimes you gotta bite the bullet, but here I don't think it works to bite the bullet. After f takes g4, queen takes h7, king f8, bishop g6, for instance, will be a skewer, will win one of my rooks. If I play g6, which is suggested by MVP, Twitch employee, Boom Liam, if g6 takes, the g5 will be open toward both kings. But this bishop is so strong. Oh, I don't think I'm getting mated there just yet. And maybe I have to go and do that. Maybe Liam has been right the whole time, but it looks so scary. It looks so scary to push this pawn, takes, and allow a check on the g5. But I might just be able to move the king out and there's no follow-up. Or g6, takes. If the king moves to bring the rook here, that looks so unpleasant. That looks so unpleasant. But perhaps it's not game over because I have rook e6. Oh, then she can take on f5. Goodness me, am I in trouble? I'm starting to see lines for her that aren't really good for me. How do I get out of this, guys? How do I get out of this? Rook e4 to sacrifice the exchange? Could be. Petrosyan, the former world champion, Tigran Petrosyan, was famous for those defensive exchange sacrifices. So there can be an exchange sacrifice for the attack, but he also has applied that a lot as a strategic element in closed positions, in defensive positions too. Rook e4, I'm not sure she will take. She could also just take the pawn. That might be the issue, that she will not even accept the exchange sacrifice. Imagine we are going down against Beth at the age of 15 if she doesn't take it, if she does not take it. I was looking at all sorts of pawn pushes, but I think neither of them are fast enough. Takes. Maybe then take here. That could get messy enough. Maybe that's the way. Maybe d4 is messy enough, but d4, bishop takes f5, then we take. Yeah, d4 perhaps makes things messy enough. It does also ruin our structure, but it opens up the long diagonal, so then giving up the exchange would be perhaps less painful. d4 takes, bishop takes, f4, or we can take back on d4 first and then bishop takes. Let's try that. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think the position is becoming so messy. We are going for it. We are going all in. We are going all in with d4. She takes back. Now we have two options. We can take on f4 to attack the rook. We can take this pawn and try to bait her into taking the pawn and then capture on f4, attacking the rook. There are lots of things also for her in the air. She can take here. She can play this move. So we have to keep attacking. We need to keep attacking. She can also take on e8. This trade is also always in the air. So queen c6 is a move I wanted to play originally after the pawn push, but I'm not threatening much. It looks scary. The queen and bishop battery on an open diagonal is usually a winning combination. It would normally be winning, but the queen on h3 is very strong, guarding the h2 pawn and the f3 and g2 squares. So after queen c6, I only have one check and no follow-up. There is no follow-up after the king goes to f2. So I'm thinking of taking the pawn, one of the pawns, this or this. Which move order is better? Let's see what she does after bishop takes. It becomes very messy, the position. Rook d1, so now we can take here if we want to. This d5, white can try to use. So takes bishop c4 or bishop takes f5. I can also take here and see if she takes back with the rook or with the bishop. I think that could be a good idea in the right moment. Is this the right moment for it? If she takes back with the rook, at least the rook comes off of the d file where it's standing well in front of my queen. Or if she takes back with the bishop, we can take on d4 with a check. Maybe it's time to take here and see what she does. This check doesn't scare me, she's saying. You're not scared at all, Beth. I see. You don't care about my attack, you only see your attack. Fair play, fair play. White still has quite some attack, but also her king is exposed. So this is a double-edged position. It's a very sharp position. Once again, I can play these kind of moves, but it's only a check. The king comes to f2, and I don't have a follow-up. So I'm thinking of taking this pawn just to attack the bishop. If she takes, I'll take that bishop, and then the other bishop is gone. And she doesn't have time to play bishop c4 because I'm giving up the rook for the 2 pieces. We have won a pawn now because the bishop dropped back to b2. And actually, what's annoying for her, it's more than the pawn. I have now this square for my bishop guarded by the pawn, and that check. Finally, it's her king. Finally, it's her king that's more exposed, because bishop e3, look at our bishops. This bishop and this bishop, the pair of bishops on the long diagonal and this e3 square. That looks crushing, because if bishop e3, after that check, if she moves the king to f1, I can take this pawn with a check. The rook will be giving a check and the queen on h3 is hanging. So that's not a good move. After bishop e3, she has to give up the rook for my bishop. We take back on e3. And in that moment, she could try to win the rook back with a move like bishop c4, but then this pawn is still alive. I don't think she has time for it. This position suddenly, I think, is winning. She's giving up the rook. As expected, she can now win. So instead of taking the pawn, she could have tried. I just want to show this moment real quick. Bishop c4 to try to win the rook back, but we have either bishop d5 or what I was thinking after bishop c4, this check, super unpleasant, and then pushing the passed pawn later. So she chooses the right move. She gets rid of the very strong passed pawn we had, but now this is an exchange up for us. It's still not completely winning because there are still ideas for white too, so we gotta be precise here. Now a move like queen d5 is more appealing than before because we also have the g2 square. We are threatening checkmate with queen d5, or I can move first the rook to the open e file. But actually, since the queen is not on h3, taking the pawn on g4 is also now an idea, or pushing f4. Couple of appealing options here, and this is not winning the rook just yet because I have bishop d5. Now queen d5 doesn't drop the queen because bishop c4 is pinning the queen and the rook. I can give checkmate, so that's not a good move after queen d5. Queen d5 I like a lot because it will mean that white has to use one of her pieces to guard the g2 square. After queen d5, we need to take a look at this check because I'm allowing a back rank check, but if rook f8, there's no follow-up attack for white. Then she could play bishop c4, but her queen is also hanging. So I'm gonna go for queen d5. Beth is trying to run away because I was threatening checkmate on g2. She's trying to go this way. Now I can bring the rook into the attack by capturing the pawn. So it's more than the pawn. What's important about this move is that it allows my rook to get into the attack too. And now we have a couple of good options. This check on the back rank seems really appealing because then we could capture this pawn too with a check. I'm gonna go for it. Rook e7 would be a way to win the queen if the rook was guarded on e7, but it's not. So let's not blunder. Let's not blunder the rook. This check followed up by this capture. The pawn itself wouldn't be that important if it wasn't that we already have a pawn on g4, so that's a passed pawn. This will be a very strong passed pawn. There are a couple of other ways to win this position, to bring the rook into the game, but I think this is very practical. You get rid of that pawn, and now in every endgame you have a winning passed pawn. That pawn is a winning pawn. It's a queen. White will have to give up a bishop for it at least. But apart from having an exchange up, pawns up, winning passed pawn, you should always pay attention to your opponent's threats. The opponent could play queen e8 and after rook f8, bishop c4, so we could easily get checkmated still in this position. If I don't pay attention to those threats, white can still turn the tables with this check and winning because of the back rank. So we need to be always paying attention to what the opponent wants. If I give this check, for instance, which is a very appealing one, white has a counter check with bishop c4. So careful. We need to be careful here. What's the most practical way of dealing with these threats? This square, if I could guard that square or create some space for my king, but the thing is after this check, the rook is in the way. What we could also do is to guard that rook. If I play a move like queen f4. I'm about to trade queens. Of course, queen trade with material up is something that we would like to achieve. It's beneficial. And if queen f4, queen check, I then drop the rook to f8. If bishop c4 check, I can now move the king because my queen is guarding the rook on f8. So you always need to think about how you can make your own king more secure, more safe. And I think a move like queen f4 helps my queen to be more active and also helps the queen and the rook to work as a team. White does not have time after queen f4 to play bishop c4 because the queen on e3 is hanging. So once again, queen f4, queen e3 check, then rook f8, and whether bishop c4 or queen e6, I hide my king in the corner. That's the plan. She's trading queens, which is surprising. This endgame is very much winning for black. We could move the rook, but also very tempting when you have an advanced pass pawn is to push it even further. Let's just calculate. It doesn't work here, but you need to calculate sometimes if it works or not. g3, bishop f4, g2, almost the queen, but the bishop can still catch it. So almost winning, but not quite. Not quite. First, we're gonna move the rook. Pinning this bishop makes sense. I'm threatening bishop e4. And now if we start pushing the pawn, it's way more difficult for our opponent to catch it because the bishop cannot make it to e3, cannot make it to f4. A check, that's alright because now we can move away. King f8, bishop a3, king e8. White will eventually run out of the checks. You want to activate your king in endgame, so bringing it toward the center of the board makes more sense than hiding it in the corner. The bishop made it to guard the promotion square, but that alone will not save white's position. I can give this check to activate the bishop further and then push. It was also fine to push the pawn immediately, maybe because it could have been even stronger actually, so that the king is not getting closer, but I just like a lot how the bishop is standing on e4. Sometimes it's just a personal preference. This pawn is not really important because it takes a long time for white to push those pawns while we can go and start pushing the h pawn instead to support the g pawn. So in this position, lots of moves are winning. Rook f1 is one of the winning moves because if the rook is taken, we have a new queen. If after rook f1 they are not taking the rook, then we are threatening g1. But I think even simpler than any of those is to push this pawn, because once you push it all the way to h2, you're threatening to get two queens, and two queens are a lot. The rook is hanging, which usually means you should move it. As I said earlier, this square is an appealing one because it helps the pawn to be pushed to g1, and if it's taken, we have a new queen. Beth keeps giving checks. Makes sense, she does not want to resign, she's fighting, but I'm gonna hide the king here and then push the h pawn. So we could push g1 and trade our pass pawn for the bishop, but I think even more efficient is that we push this h pawn and no one can stop that pawn there. Bishop d3 she's playing to trade this bishop. Lots of appealing moves here, but perhaps the simplest is just to trade it and then push h2. She plays bishop g1 to try to stop the pawns, but I'm gonna take everything I'm given and then push. Now, this is another one of those moments when Mr. Scheiber would say, now you resign, but the bot hasn't been taught to resign, and she's still saying, this check doesn't scare me. Beth, are you sure? I'm gonna have lots of queens on the board, and your pawns are still too slow. I'm gonna queen all of the pass pawns I had, all of them. Easiest way to checkmate, if you use your pieces to cut the king. So instead of giving checks, there are lots of checks here in this position that you can give. But even better, I think, is if you use your pieces that they are cutting the king. So I'm using the rook and the queen to take away these squares, and now the queen, the second queen, can give checkmate. This game was a lot tougher than the previous ones, and she's saying, I've never lost a serious game before, let's play again. She's so hungry to learn, so much dedication to improving at chess. Now we need to prove it. We cannot just say it and then declare we are doing fine here. We need to prove it. How do we prove it? She's saying still theory. Okay, good for you, Beth. I don't know it. I don't study as much theory as you. Good for you, theory nerd. Thank you so much for watching. This was streamed live on my Twitch channel where I stream full time, 5 days a week. Do catch us live next time or follow the highlights and the VODs here on my YouTube channel. In either case, I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much again and bye for now. Until the next time.